All right, here we go. Had a little technical difficulty there for a second, but I was able to actually figure it out. So, hello, everybody. I know that some of you are still joining right now, but excited to have all of you here. And my glasses, I was just outside because I'm actually moving and closing on a house on Friday. It was supposed to be on Monday, but things happen. And so I was just helping to sell some stuff outside and getting rid of a giant bookcase, which I'm glad we got rid of the big bulky things. But I digress. So if you are here and you are able to, um, and you're actually live right now, please put live in the chat. And I'd love to just see how everyone is doing, how everyone is feeling right now at this time. And so, oops, I paused that one. And let's remove that. One second here. All right, there we go. Things happen. Technical difficulties today. It's Wednesday. I'm getting there. Um, but yes, if you're watching live right now, put live in the chat. And before we get started in the topic, I don't really like to just jump in the topic right away. I like to be able to just check in, see how you're doing. Um, and what's really going to be exciting about this topic today is we are going to talk about how psychologically safe you feel at work, some tips for psychological safety, and there's going to be a little gift that you get at the end, which is going to be super exciting. So if you're here live again, please put live in the chat. If you're just joining, I'm Geronda Wallach Spiller, speaker and coach, and welcome to Leading in the Moment with Geronda on this wonderful Wednesday. And so the question I want to ask out there right now is, what brings you joy? What are things that you do that you just love and that just brings you so much joy when you do them? And I was reflecting on this. This is a question that gets asked sometimes in just different forums that I'm a part of. And what really brings me joy is, one, I'm closing on my house, which I'm really excited about. It brings me joy because this has been a goal for many years. And um, just in a good place really to close on the house, feeling really excited about it, have a really good location that we found. We're going to be in Maine, which is a beautiful state. Um, and why that brings me joy is not just buying the house, but also being in a location. I love nature. I love to be a little bit more secluded. I grew up in Long Island, New York, been to New York City, not like a big city person, but I love to go up and I love to show up to it. So, um, hey, Alex, thank you for joining. So that brings me joy to be able to go to a location where I can just be um, in a small town with some really great community and people. Another thing that brings me joy, of course, is my partner. She's fantastic and super supportive and much more calm than I am as an individual. But also, what I love that brings me so much joy is live jazz shows. So I love being in live, any really live musical shows, but jazz is my vibe. I love when I can just hear the different instruments jiving together. If there's a singer, that's also really great. Jazz music is my favorite. So that's really brings me joy. So I'd love for you, if you are watching live, again, put live in the chat. If you just joined us, I'm Geronda Wallach Spiller, speaker and coach, and welcome to Leading in the Moment with Geronda. So I would love for you to put in the chat things that bring you joy, because I'd love to just hear from you as well. All right. So what are we going to be getting into today? Um, oh, Alex, good question. So is there a jazz scene where I am moving? There actually is a jazz scene where I'm moving, which is really nice. It's a small local jazz area. I'm also going to be pretty close to, not pretty close, but easily accessible to Boston, which has a ton of music there too. So great question. Uh, so getting to the topic, are you feeling psychologically safe at work? The reason why I started talking about this, or I felt like this was a good topic to talk about, is I'm part of this external DEI HR group, and we come together on a monthly basis and we bring up different topics that affect people. in the workplace. And we were talking about psychological safety. We were talking about, um, safety and comfort, and when safety is important, or when you feel that you are safe, or how do you determine when someone feels safe and when someone's feeling more comfortable. So, um, we recognize that there's so many layoffs happening. There's a lot of restructuring. There's just a lot going on economically in our country. Just even a lot happening with legislation for the LGBTQ plus in this country. There's just so much happening, and a lot of people categorize it, or they'll say the world feels like it's just on fire. There's so much going on, and for those who are leaving positions or who have been laid off, there's this feeling of, well, what's next for me? There's a lot of reflection that's happening now where they want to go to organizations, or take time for themselves and really reflect on, well, what do I want from an organization? What do I want from a leader? What do I want from a team? Um, I know that there's varying reasons why some companies are deciding to go through these different layoffs, but really focusing on, um, the experience. Any layoff is not fun. I've been through three in my career, but how you handle people's experiences, and how you handle their mental health, how you handle just the layoffs in general, or the restructuring, or communication, plays a huge part, a significant part in how psychologically safe they might feel. Um, and yes, Alex, thank you for sharing that in the comments. The world being on fire makes it even more important that we prioritize joy. So thank you for reflecting it back to my question in the beginning of what brings you joy. So there's also a lot of feeling of history is going backwards, or history is repeating itself, and there's some fear too. I oftentimes hear a couple of things from leaders, and I promise you, we'll get into what psychological safety is, and everything. But there's a lot of thoughts and feelings and discussion too around, um, what leaders are supposed to do in these times. What if I say the wrong thing? Or how do I, as a leader, prioritize my own well being, and mental health, because I'm losing my team? Or I have to be the one to make the decisions of who gets laid off, or I have to be part of the process, and it's just gut wrenching for me. So that's a big part of it too. But how psychologically safe you feel at work is usually a group or a team effort, but it comes down to a couple of things. And so that's what's going to bring me, today, to giving you that definition of what psychological safety actually is. And so when we define psychological safety, it's the shared belief that's held by members of a team that it's actually okay to take risks and show up authentically. It's also okay to express your ideas and your concerns and speak up with questions, and even admit your mistakes, which I make them every single day, um, without fear of a negative consequence. So it's important that we look at the word team, because teams actually shape the learning behaviors of the group, and it also affects your team performance. So, how you're showing up as a leader, and your behavior patterns and the behaviors of other team members, is going to impact how psychologically safe you are going to feel, or how psychologically safe others are feeling, you're providing to them, in order for them to feel like they can bring their authentic selves if they choose to, or express their ideas, or admit their mistakes. I actually worked for an organization, at one point in my career, where making mistakes was not okay. Um, and as somebody who has anxiety, I will admit I'm very much okay to share my anxiety with each of you. Um, as somebody who is a very anxious person, that was horrifying for me. So anytime I make a mistake, I would not share anything with my manager or my team, and I wouldn't share anything with anybody. I would just be like, okay, I need to figure out how I'm going to fix this. And sometimes I would just spend hours on trying to figure out how to fix this one thing. And it was not not at all a feeling of psychological safety. I did not feel comfortable admitting mistakes. Also, when I would ask questions, um, even though during onboarding it was any question is very much a great question. Other people might have that question. I would ask a question and it would come across as, why are you asking this question? Um, without actually saying why are you asking this question. Like, you know how someone's facial expression sometimes is kind of like, mm, oh, did you really need to ask that question? But they don't want to just say it. It was kind of a stupid question. That so that example for me, when I started moving to different organizations, I started getting really, really scared and into this bad habit of not admitting my mistakes and just not asking questions. I would try to research as much as I possibly can on my own, which I know is still a good thing to do. Try to be proactive. Um, but I actually wouldn't ask questions, and I would make mistakes, and I wouldn't say anything, and it would be repeated to me like, "No, you can come to me with questions. You can make these mistakes." But I was like, "I don't know how you're gonna, I don't know how you're gonna um, handle that, or I don't know how you're gonna react to that." Because in other organizations, that's what I was told, and then it was complete opposite. So I had negative consequences that happened to me. So that's something else that we have to think about is the experiences that others might be bringing into an organization. You may have to try to mitigate or alleviate a lot of those different feelings that are being brought with them from past experiences. Um, and when you actually make mistakes and you want to be able to get support and get coached, you can actually, that mistake can get amplified significantly. And even sometimes when you have a mistake that feels very small, um, then in retrospect, it's probably something that's easy to fix, but in your mind and psychologically, you're thinking, oh my God, this is horrible, this is horrible, this is horrible. So that's just one example of, in my team, I saw this also happening to other people. It was happening to me. I saw that you just really had to, it was just churn, 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 churn. You had to work, 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 as, as Rihanna says. Um, but it can really cause a lot of this trauma for people. So, so going back to the discussion that I had about this and psychological safety, is it is based on the teams, and all teams should have psychological safety. But there's some things that we really need to reflect on and think about is, how do you know when you've achieved psychological safety? Because safety means something different for every single person. It's not, safety is not going to feel the same for certain people. My definition of safety and how I feel for safety will feel very different than how it's going to feel as well. So, if you're just jumping in, thank you so much for joining. Put live in the chat uh, if you are joining right now and you're able to join live. And again, I'm going to have a nice, fun little gifts for you. And thank you for joining me for leading into the moment with Geronda. All right. So, as we move on here in this topic, something else that I want everyone to think about. And actually, before I go into that, I want to take a quick second um, to bring something up here. But anywho, so when you're thinking about different negative consequences that do come with it, you actually do want to start thinking about how this impacts the brain, because it's going to impact productivity and many other things for your team. So consequences can actually lead those to those traumatic takeaways or experiences, as I mentioned with my own experience. And so I kind of want to use the experience of not being able to ask questions or admitting that you made mistakes and tie that to how this actually affects the brain. So you have your prefrontal cortex, which is your executive functioning. It's what regulates your emotions and impulse control. Then you have your amygdala, which is, it scans your environment for threats. And then you have your hippocampus, which is more your memory and your ability to learn. So when I was going through this experience and going to the next organization for psychological safety, and not being able to make mistakes or ask questions, so I just felt like I was just essentially not very, um, what's the word I'm looking for? Not very competent in what I was doing. My prefrontal cortex led me to anytime that I would get feedback or anytime that I asked or wanted to ask a question, I would not regulate my emotions very well. I would get very hot. I would get very anxious. I would need to take a break. I would need a little bit of time. Sometimes I would even leave the room. Sometimes I've actually cried at work because I didn't know how the experience was going to be when I was going to ask a question or if I was going to admit a mistake. And a lot of times the mistake was literally nothing to worry about, but I made it so much more than it actually was in my mind. And when going to another organization, going to the next organization, I was constantly scanning my environment. I was like, okay, well, now I gotta see how these people are, and now I gotta see if, like, are they really not gonna um like, are they really not going to reprimand me for asking a question? What is that even gonna look like? And do they genuinely want me to ask questions and it actually be okay? And then with my memory and my learning, my memory kept thinking about, okay, well, now this is just my all the memories were negative memories, and I'm learning to now not advocate for myself, ask questions, be do what I need to do to be successful in my job. And so when it affects the brain, I think the biggest thing you really have to think about is the regulation of emotions and the scanning environment for threats. Because if you cannot regulate your emotions at work, productivity is going to go down. You might lose somebody, you might have turnover. You may have so many different negative impacts on your team and your organization just by doing those little things. So I'm going to put a plug out there. I'm going to put in the chat right now. Um, I am going to add a link to my newsletter. And for more on this topic, it will be available there. Um, and so if you are feeling inspired and want to join this newsletter, please do so and share with others. I just put it in the chat for everyone to get access to. Um, but now let's continue on with our conversation here. And thank you for letting me put that in there. So, how can you, as a leader, focus on one, your well being, but also remember that we all bring it to work with us, our personal experiences, what things we've gone through, our traumas, our personal lives. And so I always say when it comes to leadership awareness around psychological safety, as the individual, as a leader, it's reflecting on how confident you feel you are bringing psychological safety to your teams. It's being okay and accepting of that awareness. And then it's taking action on that awareness as well. It's not just admitting that maybe you don't allow people to make mistakes and you get really frustrated by it. That's really great, but what are you going to do about that moving forward? How are you going to make sure that you're not bringing that same energy to your team? How are you going to reflect on your team as well and how they truthfully feel about you versus what your perception of you as a leader is? So, as leaders, similar to how you would want to provide psychologically safe spaces to your teams, you also want to be able to be vulnerable with your teams and letting them know what you need and maybe the reason why something's happening. Now, I will put a caveat though. You do not want to use something as an excuse to why you reacted the way you may have reacted. So, what do I mean by that? Somebody comes to you um, and they have a question and you roll your eyes or you're so frustrated and you're like, "Oh, sorry, I just had a bad day." Um, you don't want to use the fact that you had a bad day as the reason that you just attacked them and then do nothing about that. It's okay to say, "I had a bad day. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to put this on you. Um, let's revisit this again. Let's try again." There's nothing worse than just leaving it lingering, and then that person's like, "What did I do? Like, what is going on?" So take time that you need for yourself. Talk to your manager. And if your manager's not providing a psychologically safe space for you to be an effective leader and take the time that you need, maybe you need to have a different conversation with that manager. So, what are some questions that you can work through so that you can actually start taking action and fostering a psychologically safe space? One, you really need to know how well you know your team. Not everyone's going to share every single thing about themselves, but even things like Are there are there team members that are introverted? Do you have more men than you do have women on the team? What is the racial demographic of your team? Now, don't make assumptions on what and of any of this. This is if you know this information. Um, Even things like where are they geographically located? That might impact how you go about approaching bringing psychologically safe spaces to them, for them to ask questions. There are some countries where challenging authority is not as welcome, and so if there might be different ways you have to think about how they approach giving you feedback. Another way is the current breakdown of your team, like I was mentioning, the demographics of your team, and who are you actually creating safe spaces for? So really checking your bias as well. Do you find that you're doing more or presenting opportunities or allowing certain people to be themselves, but those who are different than you, who are trying to be authentic, are you treating them differently? Being very aware and coming to this awareness for yourself will make huge strides in your one being vulnerable and allowing your team to get a little bit more comfortable in sharing things about themselves with you. What is your approach to assess the well-being of your team and other employees? Again, I mentioned way in the beginning of this that there's a lot of legislation right now affecting the LGBTQ plus community. If you have LGBTQ plus on your team, how are you checking in with them to ensure that they're getting what they need? Now, not everybody is going to react the same. Some might be really, really devastated by this and need some time off. Others might just want just a space for them to just get their work done, focus on their work, and not talk about it. But how are you ensuring that you're providing this well-being for these team members? Um, and then also, how confident are you in recognizing and taking action to support employees who are stressed out? There could be many different reasons why they're stressed out. And by stressed out, what does stress feel like and look like for certain people on your team? Now, this may sound like, oh, this is so easy and we'll just like achieve all these different questions and yeah, this is great. It can be a great start. It's going to be something that needs to be continuous, and but I will say doing all these things will, as you start to make this a consistent aspect of what you do each day, or with your teams, trust will start to be built. But trust has to be there before your team can actually feel safe. So I'm going to say that again. Trust needs to be there before your team actually feels safe. Because when they start to trust you more, they may be willing to share more, and they may be willing to give you feedback, and then they may be willing to share what they need. And if you are noticing that your team is a little bit more silent and isn't really sharing much about what they need or sharing much about what's going on, that's saying a lot too. Why is that? Is there not are they not comfortable coming to you and sharing these different things? And so, um, really reflecting on that, staying curious, being empathetic, put yourself in the position of the other person, and being vulnerable to share what you're experiencing as well really opens up that conversation. I had a manager one time that was super vulnerable and would share just things that are going on, and they wouldn't be share everything personal going on in their life, but they might say, I had a really tough night last night. I had a family issue that happened. Like, I'm just not going to be as available to you. I hope that's okay. I appreciated that so much more than them just, you know, lashing out at me, for example, or being non-existent and I'm wondering where they are and what they're doing. Not to say that you have to share everything, but just that vulnerability was like, oh, that makes me feel good. And they also shared that they have a child that has a disability, and that makes it challenging sometimes. So then I was comfortable to share that I'm a caregiver to my spouse and how that can sometimes bring some challenges. And that connectivity, I felt some trust, and there were more instances. So it wasn't just that one moment that I felt trust, but um, I felt much more comfortable being around that person and sharing more with that person, which then led to me being a little bit more committed to my role and understanding them more and reaching out and being like, I can take this over for you. How are things going, and checking in with each other. It was just a much more cohesive, strong, respected relationship. And um, so again, psychological safety is so important in making sure that your teams feel okay to take risks, to show up authentically, to express their ideas and concerns, ask questions, and admit their mistakes. And how you address those things is going to determine their experience moving forward and how much they are able to trust you to be able to be effective in their roles. And so thank you so much for participating. As I mentioned, I put in my post, one, I'm going to share my newsletter link for anyone who joined late. And if you're joining live, thank you so much for joining live. If you're joining in the replay, totally awesome as well. I'd love your feedback on this. But I did mention that I would have a gift. And the gift that I'm going to actually share with you, I will put the link in 1 second, but I'll give you a quick little preview of what this is going to look like. So I'm going to share my screen with you all, and I hope you can see it. So I have more questions and this reflective guide. So these are 10 questions that you can build a leadership environment that is psychologically safe. And what's nice about this is, one, you get to learn a little bit more about moi, but also you can start to document these different questions that I'm having you go through, like, how many team members do you have? How long you've been managing your team? And really getting to understand your team better, and then going into deeper reflective questions like, how do you collect feedback from your team about the environment that you're creating? So being able to have this reflection is so important. And I generally will say to people, check in with this on a weekly basis or a bi-weekly basis, and just see how things are changing over time. So these are 10 questions that you'll go through, um, and then to learn a little bit more or go even deeper, then you can um, also take some time to book some time with me to get some coaching and continue to build this skill set for psychological safety. So for joining today, you're going to get access to this. I'm going to put a link to it in the chat. If you have any issues opening it up or getting access to it, please let me know. But I wanted to make sure that I gave this to you as a freebie at the end. So there it is for you. I hope you enjoy it. Thank you so, so, so much for joining me today, talking about psychological safety, letting me share my experiences with you. I'd love to, if you ever want to DM me or share your experiences. I know sometimes it can be a little scary to share how psychologically safe you might feel at work. Um, but use me as a space, as someone that I can hold space for and talk through in terms of your experience. And leaders, I know that you can create these environments for your teams. I know you can. Sometimes you just need a little bit of help. And so thank you so much for joining. The next meeting is going to be coming up on April 5th, on Wednesday, at 12 o'clock p.m. Pacific time. So this series happens every single Wednesday. No, I'm sorry, every other Wednesday, 12 p.m. 12 p.m. I promise I could talk today. 12 p.m. Pacific time. And this is Leading in the Moment with Geronda. Thank you, everyone. Have a fantastic day. And I will see you next time. Peace, everybody. Where's my hand? There it is. Peace.